on the commitments taken, and one of those commitments is, for instance, to fight protectionism, and not to take unilateral measures, or not to say buy American. This is completely against the system we want in Europe and in the world. So the Commission is going to resist there, and in fact I hope that Member States also resist there, and of course particularly in terms of the internal market. I think we have done our job to resist any attempt to break the internal market, even in the most difficult moments. But not only we are going to resist those tendencies, but we are going to deepen the internal market with some proposals. I've asked Mario Monti to come with the report. He's going to present it soon. And I'm using this as a way of a springboard for deepening the internal market. For instance, it's not acceptable that we have not a community patent. The patents in the European Union, les brevets, they cost 11 or 12 times more than the United States or Japan because of a linguistic problem. I think that we have to do, and we should do, and in fact we are working with the Spanish presidency. I hope they will support us in that direction. The question of debt, I'm not going to comment on specific case, I'm sorry, namely before elections, I think it's not the best way to do it. What I can tell is, of course, that yesterday we have issued our reports regarding several countries of the European Union, including the UK. We believe, I mean, I don't need to mention the case of Greece to see that, in fact, debt is a problem in the European countries. Some people, not only in the euro area countries, because debt, by definition, is bad economy. I mean, when we are having such high levels of debt, it means that we are putting in the new generations some responsibilities that we should not put to them. And so there are, I stick to the fundamental policy of the Stability and Growth Pact. There are acceptable levels of debt, but not what happened. In fact, the crisis was devastating from this point of view because we have lost in almost 2 years, what we have done in 20 years. That's the reality. And this is a very important problem because, I mean, money that member states spend with interests of paying because of their debt is money that they cannot use for their education, for their welfare states, and so on. So it's indeed a problem. And so I think we have to have a consistent path, and we are designing it case by case. Of course, there is not, once again, a one-size-fits-all approach to that, but the Commission is making very clear recommendations on the debt for each country. And as we have seen in some recent cases, some debts are purely unsustainable. And if someone thought that because being in the euro will be a way of avoiding the problem, I think the response is there. And this is not enough to be in the euro to avoid the problems of debt, because markets discriminate in terms of sovereign debt. And not only sovereign debt, by the way. The question that you've put to me about regarding the structural and cohesion funds, yes, that's the next step. Let's go step by step. I cannot introduce now the discussion on the budget, European budget at this stage, but of course what we expect is that to have a year marking of the European Community budget for the priorities here, to try to avoid what was, in fact, as you have said before, some of the bad spending of the previous period. And we are thinking about some innovative ways also of trying to have some association of the national budgets to these targets. If you have read the 2020 strategy, even in presentational terms, we have put clear this as European level and national level. Let's be frank, we cannot do everything at European Community level. Our budget is less than 1% of GDP in Europe. That's the reality of our budget. So let's see in which cases we can demonstrate that an euro spent at European level is better, it's more efficient than an euro spent at national level. And then make a distinction of what can be done at national level. And this brings me to the last question, in fact, regarding education. That's one of the problems we are discussing in some member states, to put it frankly. Some countries say, this is not for you to, not for the Commission, because education is a national competence. I think it's completely impossible to speak about economic policy in Europe without speaking about skills and education. So the Commission has certainly not the idea of any kind of convergence of education systems in Europe. They are different, and we fully respect that. But of course, there is a problem, is the early school leavers in Europe too many compared to our competitors, and also, as I've mentioned before, the number of people in the tertiary education, to say high education, is relatively low compared to the United States, Japan, and others. So what we are proposing is to have some kind of benchmarking on this. Is this too much? I don't think it's too much. So that argument of subsidiarity is not always well presented. It is impossible to discuss competitiveness, the global competitiveness, without speaking about skills, innovation, education. And so the Commission has to put the Member States. So we are not saying that we are going to have a uniform education system in Europe. I don't think it's possible, and I don't think it is desirable. But I think we can do something more to have, for instance, a European framework for research, to have a European research space or area, European research area, what we call the fifth freedom. I think it is possible also to invest, to give the European, the dimension of all the European dimension, instead of having 27 fragmented efforts of research today. The parochialism of some of our centers of research is incredible. I know some countries where some of the top universities have not one single non-national as professor. There are several universities in Europe like that. Some of them, by the way, in my country. So this is incredible. And when you go to the United States, I mean, the National Science Foundation, they don't speak only about Florida or about Washington or about California. They have that dimension. We need that dimension, fully respecting the national identities, but we need the European dimension for researchers, for scholars, and we can do something to promote it. Of course, not uniform. And this is the basic problem of subsidiarity that we have to discuss with the Member States, if they are ready or not to have some kind of coordination in face of this crisis. And this is to come to the point of Lisbon. Yes, the Lisbon, not myself, because, I mean, this is not an important thing, but it's true that I'm proud of being from Lisbon. But what I think is common between the Lisbon ambition of reform and the Lisbon Treaty is that the Lisbon Treaty gives us more capacity to act. And the spirit of the Lisbon Treaty is clear. It's for more Europe, not for less Europe. Sometimes some people now are reading it the other way. I don't understand why. When the Lisbon Treaty reinforces the powers of the Parliament that is directly elected for citizens, when the Lisbon Treaty makes much more cases for majority voting instead of unanimity voting, when the Lisbon Treaty creates a permanent president of the European Council, when the Lisbon Treaty gives the Commission more powers in terms of economic surveillance and monitoring, or the external representation of the European Union, this is to reinforce Europe. Or when the Lisbon Treaty creates a European External Action Service, is to reinforce Europe, not to weaken Europe, to give more European dimension. And so this is exactly what we need now for the Europe 2020. A more, let's say, a clearer commitment from leaders, and leaders at all levels. It's not only the leaders of the European Council, leaders at all levels, about the common purpose for Europe, including reform, because it's quite evident that in face of this crisis, that without reform, structural reform, reform for increasing the potential for growth in Europe, we will not succeed in the global competition.